Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Community Connection. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, mentorship, and the secret sauce of meaningful relationships and what that can do for a person's life and how this generation really needs to be mentoring the next generation. Wouldn't you agree there, Melanator?
I guess.
Yeah.
What do you mean you guess?
I guess. Listen, we're trying something different this morning.
Yeah, what are we trying different?
We're trying to see what it would be like if I was supposed to be.
Yeah, so what does Gen Z need to hear from boomers today?
Well,
Let me give you some mentorship, some guidance.
Wow. What's your favorite thing about Gen Z?
Oh, yeah, that's a short list, but I'm
Don't
sorry.
say that.
No, I
You're
know.
being- that's funny.
No, you're actually a really cool. I'm a parent to some Gen Zers, and so I think you guys got some cool things about your generation. What I really like about your generation is your desire for authenticity. Right? You want things that are real. Mm-hmm. But there's kind of a strange mix-up because you're also just huge into social media where there's like nothing real. Right? Is that true?
Yeah, I guess so.
You guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're being so cooperative today, Melanator.
So I have another thing I like about Gen Z.
Tell us.
Gen Z is very committed to causes.
They are.
They're not about joining institutions, but they're all about getting involved in a cause, and that's really cool because we like to see that passion.
Yeah. Well, off camera, one of the things that you could help me with as a Zer to a boomer, could you help me explain Insta Twitter?
Insta Twitter.
Would you
Yeah.
help me with that later?
Yeah. We'll sit down.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Good morning.
It isn't
Buddy.
even called Twitter anymore.
No, so it'd have to be
Insta X.
insects. We don't want to go there, do we? And by the way, I just really look lovely today. I love that purple royal garment that you have. You have problems with your microphone over there, Claudia?
And when I put it on this morning, I thought I probably shouldn't wear this, or it's just going to go to a new level.
A new level of mocking,
did
teasing.
anyway,
But I'm
yes.
not mocking you. I never mock you. Okay, not on that particular point. I don't mock you.
Okay.
All right.
All right, let's go. Let's
go.
change the subject.
Yeah. So why don't you introduce us to the subject and to the person who's going to help us understand the subject?
Okay, so we're talking about mentoring today, and then we're having a repeat guest because our friend Ash was here with Mustaches for Kids when we talked about. Actually, you talked about that because I was gone, but here the mustache is gone and Ash is here, and we're happy to have him here to talk about one of his passions. And so, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And you've already told us you're loquacious, and we're glad about that. So,
And I've already apologized for the constant clearing of my throat that I'm going to have to do. So I want to make sure that your listeners and viewers understand I got some allergy situation going on.
okay, well, if you don't clear your throat, then you're going to be disappointed. So, tell us a little bit about you as a person and why the space of Vision 30 and keeping kids safe and all that resonates with you.
That's a lot. So I'm going to take it, just kind of talk a little bit about how I got into the profession that I did and how it kind of all syncs up. But I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my dad was the director of kind of an old school Episcopal affiliated orphanage back in the day. And so he had, I wouldn't even know how to guess how many kids lived out at the campus, but it was kind of on the outskirts of Charlotte. And some of my earliest memories were going out to the campus with my dad and, whenever he had to go do whatever, or they took trips somewhere. And my sister and I would hang around a lot. And so these kids, excuse me, that lived out there kind of became my friends. And, I think at the time I may have felt something, I couldn't really put my finger on it, but I think I felt, these kids don't have what I have. And I had a mom and a dad, both very involved in my life. Thank God for that. But I think at the time it was just, hey, these kids are roughly my age, and they like doing some of the same things. And we went out there to the campus, and we'd run around and hang out and play sports, whatever. But I think on some level, maybe subconsciously, I felt drawn to them because I knew they didn't have what I had. They looked up at my dad. They looked up to my dad, who was a meaningful figure in their life. I mean, he was the director of the facility, but he was super involved. It wasn't, he was not just an administrator. He knew every kid there by name and, personal things about them. And so excuse me, I think that has affected me to some degree growing up. My mom's special ed teacher. So I feel like I came by it fairly honestly. My sister went on to be a special ed teacher. And I went on to, I guess my early stuff was I started running camps for the YMCA, and I went to college, because back in the early 90s, that's, if maybe you were told you had to go to college if you wanted any kind of chance in life. So I did, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And I remember going and meeting with my academic advisor, and she said, well, what are you going to major in? I'm like, I don't know. You got any ideas? And she said, well, what have you done? And I told her I'd coached basketball, coached soccer, run some camps. And she was like, oh, you like working with kids, do you? And I was like, I guess, yeah, I do. And so then, I started working for what is now Horizon Behavioral Health at the
So
time.
what did you major in?
Human Services.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
With a concentration in adolescent child development. And so I worked for what was then Community Services, now Horizon Behavioral Health, and I enjoyed my time there greatly. I mean, let me tell you, back in those days, and I'm not saying anything bad about Horizon, they do great work, and they did then, but oof, I mean, you get broken in quick working over there back in those days, and I saw some things that shook me to the core, kids in situations that I don't think I could have ever dreamt up prior to me being there. And so it was,
Probably very foreign to the way that you
right. I
were
mean,
raised and
I
lived,
lived such an easy life and had parents that, I mean, we were middle class. We weren't well off or anything, but, that didn't matter. I had caring people in my life. And so by that standard, I was extremely rich. And so, saw some things over there and some family dynamics and some living situations that, again, I couldn't have ever even dreamt up. And I think that really affected me. So then my wife and I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, which was awesome. We lived down there for about 3.5 years, and I worked as a recreation therapist at an alternative school for kids that couldn't make it in the regular school system. And then I worked for South Carolina Department of Mental Health. And both of those, I mean, you're in a bigger metropolitan area, you saw even more of the same things that I was seeing here. And then we come back here, and I just I saw the job at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I hadn't had much exposure to this organization prior to me, looking for a job when we moved back here. And I went in to interview, and what struck me about it so much was the preventative nature of Big Brothers Big Sisters services. Everything I had done in my, short career at that point was basically trying to pick up the pieces after kids had fallen, to pieces. But the way that my first executive director at Big Brothers Big Sisters, Lance Edwards, the way that he kind of pitched the services to me, it resonated with me. It was, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we weren't putting so much time and effort towards fixing kids and we could prevent them from breaking.
Perfect.
And I just really loved that because I'd seen how bad things could get. So the idea of preventing that from happening really spoke to me. And that was in 2003. I was hired in 2003, November. And I worked there in several different capacities over 4 years until I was moved into the leadership position in 2007. And I've been there ever since. Nice. And I love it. I love what we do. I love representing my organization out. I love the nobility that comes with it. I love the way people in the community see me because of my position and my affiliation with such good work and that kind of thing. So it's been great. I love making a difference for the ones that I can.
Yeah.
So I have a
George.
couple of follow-up questions.
Sure.
How did you get from Charlotte to Lynchburg? Why did you end up in Lynchburg?
My dad, he was working at the place in Charlotte called Thompson's Treatment Center. And they ended up closing. And my dad got another job for a little while in Charlotte. Actually, the most high-paying job he ever had in my young life. And it was different. He was working for some fundraising company and traveling around a little bit. Well, we got to go on some awesome trips during that time. Anyway, he just, he wanted to get back to actual service and helping kids in bad situations. So Centra Health called my dad and said, we're opening a new facility on Leesville Road in Lynchburg, Virginia, and we want you to come here and build it. And Bridges Treatment Center.
Okay.
So my dad was hired to be the first director of Bridges, and he moved up here in 1987. We stayed in Charlotte for about 6 months while my dad was living up here and coming home on the weekends. And then I believe it was late 87 or maybe early 88 when Bridges actually opened. And he stayed there until he retired, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And where'd you go to school?
I went to Lincoln and Glass, and then for college, I graduated from University of North Carolina at Greensboro.
Okay. So I think it's interesting. We've had lots of guests, and they almost always fall into two categories. One is I had a rotten childhood, and people helped me, and so now. And the other one is I had parents who modeled what it's like to step into hard places.
Yes.
Heard a great quote on the Care Portal National Call: "You can't bring light to light. If you want to bring light, you have to go into the darkness." And so people, like my parents, modeled what it's like to walk into darkness, even though they were very stable and could have done whatever that they wanted to. That was a choice. And so it sounds like your mom and dad modeled for you what it's like to walk into harder places.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really emphasize it enough how blessed I've been and how good my growing up experience was. And I make a point to tell my mom and dad that they're 86 years old now. So, when you're that old and you're kind of facing the end, you love hearing that from your kids, I would imagine. I mean, I want to hear that from my kids when I'm that old, but
I want to hear that from my kids now. Don't you want to hear that from your kids now too?
yeah, I guess. But I mean, it's going to be much more meaningful, I think, when I'm 86 years old. But they provided for me. We were living in Charlotte, and they sold off stamp collections and other things so that they could send me to a school in Charlotte that they felt comfortable with me going to, me and my sister. And I had great experience there. They just, I didn't know any kind of upheaval or unsettlement. I mean, we were a typical 2.5 nuclear family with the picket fence and the dog. I mean, very middle class, and I, the school I went to, they were all rich, and I used to, be like, oh my gosh, when I go over to their houses. But, again, the way I grew up and the attention I got and the support that I had was just, it was exactly what I would recommend for any family. And so I feel so fortunate for that. And I think it's put me in a spot to make sure that I do my best to help others realize the same thing.
I think it's a good place to take a break. We're going to look at a video again about camp. Camp's coming up. Great place for kids to go and develop friendships. And even in 1 week of camp, a little bit of mentorship can go a long way. And then when we come back, we'll switch gears and talk a little bit more specific about mentorship and the power of meaningful relationships.
First year here, we only did day camp, but I was a counselor. We were able to run the high ropes course that year, and I was with our programming coordinator, John. We were up there on the last platform that you get to then you go off on the zip line. And we were the two people getting them ready, hooking them up, getting them from the last element of the course. There's this little boy, he was an elementary schooler. He did not like heights, but he got up there anyway. And he was so nervous. He was panicky. He was going over the last wire and he was not having it. He was having a rough time, but he got over to me and John and we just got to sit down and have a conversation about, hey, I get it. I've been scary too. I've been panicky. You know, he was telling me about some of his history and things that he struggled with. And as someone who has also struggled with those things through my childhood and my adult life, anxiety and depression, being able to tell him like, hey, you're not alone. And we were up there in this tree and I was showing him the harness and getting him connected and he was scared, like, is this gonna hold me? How does this work? And we got to have a conversation about God in a tree on a zip line, because I told him God knew when he made everything that we were gonna be using this tree for this exact purpose, and he made it strong enough that it was gonna hold us. And you can trust this harness, you can trust me, you can trust this platform, but most importantly, you can trust God. I remember I was tearing up and I looked at John and we just smiled at each other, and he finally went off on the zip line. And I just sat there like, this is why we do what we do every day. This is why we do camp, because where else are you gonna have a conversation in a tree 30 foot up in the air about trusting God with a little kid? And that's why God puts us in these places as counselors, as K crew, as counselor coordinator, to have those conversations that otherwise might not happen. I'm gonna cry talking about it.
That's a really cool story. And if you want to change a kid's life, you ought to check out Hat Creek Camp. They're looking for counselors and workers this summer. But if you want to change your own life, right, it's a twofer, right? You can change somebody's life and your own life spending a summer at camp. I promise you that. So, meaningful relationships, mentorships, having those kinds of conversations, right, because you've earned the right to be heard. There's been some element of trust, so somebody's going to, right, listen to you and step off a platform
Right.
and follow the zip line all the way down to the bottom. So let's talk about that for a moment.
All right, so Big Brothers and Big Sisters probably doesn't get any more deep into this idea of meaningful relationships. So tell us about kind of the organization and what the format is that you use for that.
Well, for those who don't know, Big Brothers Big Sisters of America was started in 1904 in New York City, and it was started by a clerk of the court who was seeing juveniles come through the court system and thought there had to be a better way than locking kids up. So I appreciate the foresight there. At the time, it was just Big Brothers. It later became Big Brothers Big Sisters. But we've been here operating in this community since 1972. And we are in the business of putting positive, caring adult role models in the lives of children who are facing adversity, need a little extra guidance and assistance, in hopes that we create a relationship that puts that child on a better path towards success. Excuse me.
Liam sharing some photos of relationships and
Yeah, so, as we kind of were talking off air, it's simply helping to create meaningful relationships for kids who, haven't had maybe the parent structure to help them create those relationships, or their circumstances have prevented those relationships from being created. So we step in, we vet volunteers, background checks, we learn about them, because a lot of people don't know, but there's actually kind of a science behind what we do. When we bring potential volunteers in and families, we get to know them on a pretty deep level, so that when it comes time to make a match, we're not just putting any two people together and saying, off you go, I hope it works out. We put a lot of time and effort into making the right match, a match that we feel has real chance at sustainability and growth. Because that's, the whole idea behind it is, we're not just trying to put an adult in a child's life. If there's no chance of a real relationship being developed, that's not going to do that child any good. So we put in a lot of work on the front side to make sure that we're bringing the right kids in, kids that can benefit from the services, kids that desire to have a special person in their life. And then on the volunteer side, we're learning about them, learning their tendencies, what they like, dislike, what they work well with and around. And then that helps us make the perfect match, one that can really grow into a life-changing relationship. And I love what you said earlier about Hat Creek Camp. And I use the same kind of wording when I talk about the mentorship experience with Big Brothers Big Sisters. But what we don't often talk about enough is how life-changing it can be for our volunteers. Certainly for the children, and that's our number one priority. But equally as important is how it can change our volunteers' lives. And I hear that all the time from those who really take this experience on and put into it what it deserves and requires. But if our volunteers are ready to give themselves wholly to it, it can be just as impactful on them as it is for the kids.
What I really like about this, I want to say program, but it's much more than a program. It's a concept.
An idea.
It is an idea, and first and foremost, right? And we talk about here all the time is this work's got to be done retail, not wholesale. And what I like about this, it is retail. It's one person connecting with another person, and if that can get multiplied, it has huge impact. But what I really like about it is it's so little capital involved to make this happen compared to the programs and the institutions and all those things, because prevention is cheaper.
Indeed.
And has got a much better ROI on it, than treatment does. So,
and excuse me. And we talk about that a lot when I go out on, fundraising discussions or just promotional stuff for Big Brothers Big Sisters. But you're right. I mean, the return on investment, and all we have to pay for is the staff to manage the relationships. And that's another piece I didn't mention. Once we put people together, we have caseworkers who are assigned to each match. So, they're never left on their own. We have somebody holding their hand throughout the whole duration of their match.
So another layer of relationship going on
right.
there.
I mean, excuse me, because an average volunteer, you would hope, everybody that comes to you has some kind of knowledge or education on working with kids, but that's not the case, obviously. A lot of people just have a place in their heart that they want to do some good, but they've never had that experience before. So we obviously have professionally trained staff who can help them through their situation. There for them, little Johnny's not opening up to me. We've been out 3 times. Our staff steps in and helps them think of ways to get the child to open up, and that kind of thing. And it is an important piece of Big Brothers Big Sisters and what separates us from other mentoring organizations. So I wanted to make sure people understood that. But outside of our staff, we're not throwing a bunch of money at things. It's just our staff to help these 2 people connect and then support it as it hopefully grows.
I know there's a time commitment, right? There is a time commitment. So
there
what
is,
does that look like?
We talk about that when people apply and everything, and I'll go ahead and say it here. I mean, we have a suggested 10 hours a month spent with the child, but I don't even like to focus on that really, because it's not about punching a clock. It's not about keeping a timesheet of the time you spent with the child. That's not what we're trying to create. We're trying to create the mindset of putting a child in a positive, caring adult role model's life, and that role model being invested in it. And when you're invested in it, you don't need to focus on the hours that you're spending. It happens organically. You got to go pick up groceries today. Why not pick up your little brother, little sister, and go do it with them? So we do talk to our volunteers about, we'd like for you to see them 10 hours a month. What we've seen, though, is that our volunteers go far beyond that because it just becomes part of their daily life. It's no longer seen as this is my volunteer experience. It's just I made a commitment and this is who I am now.
Well, and I think we have to be intentional now.
Yep.
If you want to have a relation, so I don't think that having an hour expectation, it's good for us to have expectations. I mean, having intentional relationships outside of family for anybody now is tough. And if you don't have it in the back of your mind, this needs to become part of my life, and there needs to be a certain number of hours, it's just going to become one of those things you forget about.
Yeah, and so obviously, like I said, we do have that time guideline in there, but the idea is to create it within the volunteer that they're not, they don't focus on that, and it's just really seeing the child. And we understand people's lives get busy. I mean, we have volunteers that have jobs that take them out of town for, a week or two at a time, and if that happens, we understand. What we want is, you don't have to rush back into town and make up your time that you missed. What we want is you to be mindful of that. Reach out to little Johnny and say, hey, man, I got to go out of town for a week, but I'll probably call you while I'm on my trip, and, we'll talk and catch up then. And when I get back, we'll get back to doing something fun.
And you also like for them to stay for a while in the relationship, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
You want them to stay for a while in that relationship, like a year, something, right? Something meaningful.
Yes, we're asking volunteers right off the bat to commit 12 months.
Yeah.
And again, what we've seen there right now, we have an average match length of 33 and a half months.
Wow.
And the commitment was 12 months. So what's that say to you?
Yeah.
What that says to me is that our volunteers are feeling supported and that they're seeing the fruits of their labor. If not, they wouldn't be going, 3 times what their commitment level is. So we feel great about that. That's a metric we focus on and really pay attention to, because I think it tells a pretty big story there.
And Allison Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
And she has found research that says that mentorships that are less than a certain amount of time are actually detrimental to a kid. Because you bring somebody new into your life, you say, this is somebody who's going to care about you, and they bail on you in 2 or 3 months. It's actually more harmful than if you never had them in your life at all.
That is 100% accurate. And, I make a point to say that too, because when people complain about, because we have had complaints about the process that a potential volunteer goes through. It is arduous. It's time consuming. We run multiple background checks. We bring the volunteer in for a face-to-face interview. Sometimes we do a home visit. We gather tons of information on our volunteers, and our volunteers have been like, this is worse than a tax audit. But the thing is it's kind of like that by design, because if you're willing to stick it out through that, then I know that you're invested and this is a meaningful thing to you. You didn't just come in here off the street on a whim because you felt, like that day like you wanted to save the world. I mean, if you're willing to stick it out through that process, you've already shown at least some commitment. And so that's good for us. And, we try to be efficient, and we are. But again, that process is very telling.
With foster parent training, I call it weed out the wimps.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to go so strong on the language there, but yeah. I mean, we do use it to weed people out. And again, it's because we would much rather you bail before you get matched with a child rather than 2 months into a match and you've disappointed a child. And as the research that Allison spoke to, it can be very damaging.
Which is more difficult to get a volunteer to step into that space, or to get a parent to say, my child needs this, and willing to take that risk of having a stranger step into their life?
That's a good question. And I'll tell you this. I've been at Big Brothers Big Sisters 20 years, and I still don't know how parents are so comfortable with letting strangers into their life like they are. Now, with that said, because I am a parent, and I can't imagine meeting someone and then a week later sending my child off with this person
Yeah.
for an all-day event somewhere. With that said, I'm also not in the position that a lot of these families are. So I think that makes a big difference. And I think our staff does an excellent job of communication with our families and assuring them that these people have been properly vetted and we, know them inside and out by the time we're matching them with that family. But it's still, I would think it's very
It's risky,
unnerving
yeah.
to let your child go off with someone. But, again, we have everything in place to ensure child safety, and we feel good about that. And
I'm guessing most of the time you have a waiting list. Like there's more kids than there are volunteers. So
Right.
Parents are always looking for opportunities to get their kids involved, and there's never enough volunteers.
right. I mean, we talk in the office all the time about the day that it will be when we have a waiting list of volunteers
That would
rather
be
than
beautiful.
kids. I don't know if that ever happens. But, waiting list right now, probably about 30 kids on it. But frankly, if I picked up the phone and called some of our school partners, that list could probably be 100 by tomorrow.
Wow.
Just the need is there.
So we got to wrap this up, and this is a good place for you to look into the camera and make your appeal
It
for
is.
volunteers.
It is, and thank you for this time. I appreciate people listening today about who we are and what we do, and I would encourage you that if you're looking for a good volunteer experience, to at least give Big Brothers Big Sisters a look. In my personal opinion, I feel there's no other gift that is quite as impactful as your time spent with somebody who needs it. So come check us out at Big Brothers Big Sisters and change a child's life. You can find us at bigcva.org or on Langren Road. I appreciate everybody's consideration.
All right. Thank you, Ash.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for telling your story and
Yeah.
the connection with your dad at a children's home. That
pretty cool.
is powerful. Thank you, Claudia.
You're welcome, Mr.
All right. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next week on Community Connection.
Nobody gets to choose their family. If a person is fortunate enough to be born into a healthy family, then life can be much like floating down a smooth, gentle river in the summertime. But an unhealthy family is like a dangerous river, filled with rocks, debris, and fast-moving water. This river swiftly leads to the steep waterfall of adulthood, tragically forming a new river of dysfunction. Even if you aren't born into an unhealthy river, there are many streams that cause a person to get there. But there is only one way to get out, and that is through a meaningful relationship. Across our region, there are many agencies, churches, and families who are devoted to helping children escape from unhealthy rivers. Some feel their role is to wade in and rescue children. They foster, adopt, or provide safe families. Others stand by the river and support the rescuers by providing what they need. Still, others are upstream and stand in the gap to keep children from ending up in the negative situations. At Patrick Henry Family Services, we see ourselves as having an additional role. We are running up and down the shores of the unhealthy river, screaming, "Can't you see the children in the water? You have to do something." Vision 30 is a 10-year initiative. By 2030, we envision a region where all children are safe in their own family, or with caregivers who are supported by a local faith community. So, where do you stand at the river? Are you upstream, keeping families together and strong by standing in the gap? Are you in the river, directly impacting children? Are you on the shore, providing support for the brave folks who have entered the river? Or are you just passing by without noticing? No matter who you are, come down to the river with us. Let us help you find your place. Not only will lives be changed, but you will never be the same.